Picture a woman on her knees in freezing snow, her bare hands trembling as she peels off her only coat to wrap around a half-frozen penguin whose heartbeat is barely there, whose eyes are crusted with ice, whose tiny body has almost surrendered to the cold. And now picture that same woman 8 months later screaming her daughter's name as something terrible unfolds near the frozen shoreline, her legs not fast enough, her arms too far away. And in that exact moment when all hope seems lost, a familiar black and white figure emerges from the icy mist and does something that no one could have predicted, something that changes everything. But what exactly did this penguin do to save a child it had no reason to remember? And why did it come back to the one person who once refused to let it die? Because the answer to that question will stay with you long after this story ends. Her name was Elena Heartwell. She was 32 years old, and she lived in one of the most isolated places on Earth, a tiny fishing village called Port Older that clung to the southern coast of Patagonia, where the land met the Antarctic waters and the winters were so brutal that some years the village lost contact with the outside world for weeks at a time. Elena had moved there 6 years ago after her husband passed away in a car accident, and she had needed somewhere quiet, somewhere far from the memories that haunted every corner of her old life. So she packed up everything she owned, took her savings, and bought a small weathered cottage at the edge of the village where the wind howled every night and the sea stretched out endlessly like a cold grey mirror. Her daughter Lily was born 2 years after she arrived, and from the moment that little girl took her first breath, Elena's world had a center again, a reason to wake up, a reason to survive the loneliness that came with living at the edge of the world. Lily was 4 years old now, small for her age, with wild curly hair that never stayed in place and a laugh that echoed through the cottage like music, and she had this way of finding wonder in everything: the frost on the window, the way her breath made clouds in the cold air, the seals that sometimes appeared on the rocks near the shore. Elena worked part-time at the village's only supply shop and spent the rest of her days keeping the cottage warm, tending to a small vegetable garden that barely survived the climate, and making sure Lily never felt the absence of a father she would never know. It was a quiet life, a simple life, and Elena had made peace with it, but she never could have imagined how everything was about to change because of a single act of compassion on one of the coldest nights of the year. The blizzard had rolled in without warning, the kind of storm that the elders in the village talked about in hushed voices, the kind that had taken lives before and would take them again, and by the time it passed 3 days later, the world outside Elena's cottage was unrecognizable, buried under snow so deep that she had to dig a path just to open her front door. The morning after the storm, she bundled Lily up with the neighbor who sometimes watched her and set out to check on the shoreline because the wind had been so violent that she worried about damage to the small wooden dock where she sometimes fished during warmer months. She walked for nearly 20 minutes through knee-deep snow, her lungs burning from the cold, and when she finally reached the rocky stretch of beach where the land crumbled into the sea, she saw something that stopped her completely. There, wedged between 2 frost-covered boulders, was a penguin, but not a penguin standing or waddling or doing any of the things penguins were supposed to do. This penguin was lying on its side, completely still, its feathers matted with ice, its flippers pressed against its body as if it had been trying to conserve whatever warmth it had left before the cold one. Elena approached slowly, her heart already sinking because she assumed it was dead, but when she knelt down and placed her hand gently on its chest, she felt it, the faintest flutter of a heartbeat, a whisper of life that had somehow refused to give up. The penguin was a young Magellanic, probably separated from its colony during the storm and pushed onto shore by the violent waves, and it was clear that it had been lying there for hours, maybe longer, slowly freezing to death while the world raged around it. Elena looked around and saw nothing but endless white and grey, no one else walking the shore, no rescue boats in the water, no sign that help would come from anywhere except from her. She hesitated because the smart thing to do was to leave it, go home, stay warm, protect herself, because this was nature and nature could be cruel and sometimes animals died and there was nothing anyone could do about it. But then she looked at that penguin again, at the way its chest rose and fell so slightly, at the way its eye twitched just barely, still trying to see the world, still trying to hold on, and something inside her broke. She pulled off her coat, the thick wool one that had kept her alive during countless winters, and she wrapped it around the penguin as carefully as she could, lifting the frozen creature into her arms and holding it against her chest as she turned and began the long walk back to her cottage. By the time she reached her door, her fingers were numb and her teeth were chattering so hard she could barely speak, but she got inside, she closed the door against the cold, and she set the penguin down on a pile of blankets near the wood stove. The village doctor came by that evening because word traveled fast in a place like Port Older, and he told Elena that she was wasting her time, that the penguin was too far gone, that even if it survived the night it would probably have permanent damage and never be able to return to the wild, but Elena didn't listen. She stayed up all night, changing the blankets as they grew damp, dripping warm water into the penguin's beak, massaging its flippers gently to encourage circulation, and somewhere around 3 in the morning, the penguin opened its eyes fully for the first time and looked directly at her. It didn't move, didn't struggle, just looked at her with those dark intelligent eyes as if it was trying to understand who she was and why she had chosen to fight for its life when the world had given it every reason to die. The days that followed were exhausting and uncertain, filled with small victories and terrifying setbacks, moments when the penguin seemed to improve followed by hours when it refused to eat and Elena was sure she was going to lose it, but she didn't give up. She fed it small pieces of fish that she defrosted in warm water, she kept the fire burning constantly, she talked to it in a low soothing voice even though she knew it couldn't understand her words, and slowly, gradually, something incredible began to happen. The penguin started to recover, its feathers regained their shine, its eyes grew brighter, it began to stand on its own and waddle awkwardly around the small living room, and Lily, who had been watching all of this with the wide-eyed fascination of a 4-year-old, became absolutely enchanted. She would sit on the floor and giggle whenever the penguin walked past her, its flippers swaying in that comical way that penguins move, and the penguin, for reasons Elena couldn't explain, seemed drawn to the sound of Lily's laughter. It would waddle toward her whenever she called out, it would tilt its head when she sang little songs, and once, when Lily was sitting quietly looking at a picture book, the penguin waddled over and simply stood beside her, close enough that its shoulder touched her arm, and stayed there for nearly an hour. Elena started calling it Milo because Lily insisted that everything needed a name and Milo was the name of a character in her favorite bedtime story, and even though Elena kept reminding herself that this penguin was a wild animal and would need to return to the ocean eventually, she couldn't help the warmth that spread through her chest every time she watched Milo and Lily together. The bond between them grew in small quiet moments, the way Milo would turn his head toward Elena's voice when she entered the room, the way he would accept fish from her hand without hesitation while he still flinched away from anyone else who visited, the way he sometimes stood near the window watching the sea as if he remembered where he came from but wasn't quite ready to return. 6 weeks passed, then 8, and by the time spring began to soften the edges of winter, Milo was healthy and strong and clearly restless, pacing near the door, calling out with sounds that Elena recognized as longing. She knew what she had to do even though it broke her heart, so one clear morning when the ice had pulled back from the shore and the water sparkled in the pale sunlight, she bundled Lily up, lifted Milo into her arms one last time, and walked down to the beach. She set him on the rocks near the water's edge and stepped back, and for a long moment nothing happened. Milo just stood there looking at the sea and then looking back at her, back and forth, as if he was trying to make a decision that his instincts demanded but his heart resisted. Elena knelt down and whispered that it was okay, that he needed to go, that the ocean was his home and always had been, and finally, slowly, Milo turned and waddled toward the waves. He paused one more time at the edge of the water, looked back at Elena and Lily standing on the shore, and then slipped into the sea and was gone. Lily cried the whole walk home and Elena pretended she wasn't crying too, and life returned to normal, or at least what passed for normal in their small cold corner of the world. Months went by, spring turned to summer which in that part of the world meant temperatures that were merely cold instead of brutal, and Elena found herself thinking about Milo less and less, wondering sometimes if he had found his colony again, if he was out there somewhere in the vast Antarctic waters living the life he was meant to live. But something else was growing during those months, something subtle and unsettling, a sense of unease that Elena couldn't quite name. It started with small things, the way the ice seemed to be shifting more than usual near the shoreline, creating cracks and gaps that hadn't been there before, and then there were the reports from fishermen about unusual predator activity, sea lions moving closer to shore, acting more aggressive than normal. One afternoon Elena noticed strange tracks in the snow near her property, too large to be any of the village dogs, and when she asked around, no one could explain them. She started watching Lily more closely when they went outside, never letting her wander more than a few feet away, because something in her gut was telling her that danger was circling even if she couldn't see its face. The day everything changed started like any other, bright and cold with a wind that carried the smell of salt and ice, and Elena was outside hanging laundry on the line that stretched between her cottage and the small storage shed while Lily played nearby, building little towers out of snow. Elena turned her back for maybe 30 seconds, maybe less, reaching for a shirt that had fallen from the basket, and when she looked up again, Lily wasn't there. Her heart stopped, her vision tunneled, and she scanned the yard frantically until she saw her daughter's red coat moving toward the shoreline, drawn by something Elena couldn't see, something that had caught Lily's attention and pulled her toward the water's edge. Elena started running, calling Lily's name, but her boot slipped on the icy ground and she fell hard, pain shooting through her knee, and when she looked up again she saw something that turned her blood to ice. A massive sea lion had hauled itself onto the rocks near the shore, and Lily, who had no understanding of danger, was walking directly toward it, reaching out her hand as if she wanted to pet it. Elena screamed, but her daughter didn't stop, didn't understand. And the sea lion was making sounds now, aggressive barking sounds, its teeth visible, its body positioning itself in a way that Elena recognized from years of living near these waters as a prelude to attack. She tried to stand, but her knee buckled and she fell again, and in that moment she understood with horrifying clarity that she was too far away and too hurt to reach her daughter in time. But then something impossible happened, something that would replay in Elena's mind for the rest of her life, because from the direction of the water came a sound, a loud distinctive cry that cut through the cold air like a blade, and a penguin burst from the waves, scrambling onto the rocks with more speed than Elena had ever seen any penguin move. It positioned itself directly between Lily and the sea lion, flippers extended, head raised, screaming with a ferocity that seemed impossible for such a small creature, and the sea lion hesitated. The penguin kept crying out, kept making itself a target, kept drawing the predator's attention away from the child, and in that precious moment of distraction, Lily stopped walking, confused by the commotion, and Elena found the strength to stand. She ran, her knee screaming in protest, and she reached her daughter just as the sea lion decided the small screaming bird wasn't worth the trouble and slipped back into the water. Elena grabbed Lily and pulled her close, her whole body shaking, tears streaming down her face, and when she finally caught her breath and looked toward the rocks where the penguin stood, she saw it clearly for the first time, the familiar pattern of markings on its chest, the distinctive curve of its beak, the way it was looking at her with those dark, intelligent eyes that she knew, that she remembered, that she had watched open for the first time on a cold winter night when she had refused to let a frozen creature die. It was Milo, it had to be Milo, and he had come back, he had been there at the exact moment when she needed help that no one else could provide. He had put himself between danger and the child who had once giggled at the way he walked, and Elena couldn't move, couldn't speak, could only stand there holding her daughter and staring at the penguin who had somehow remembered, who had somehow returned, who had somehow understood that there was a debt of kindness that needed to be repaid. Milo stood on those rocks for a long moment, long enough for Elena to whisper thank you through her tears, long enough for Lily to wave her small hand and call out his name in her high sweet voice, and then he turned and waddled back to the water's edge and slipped into the sea, disappearing beneath the waves as if he had never been there at all. Elena held Lily tighter than she had ever held anything in her life, breathing in the smell of her hair, feeling the warmth of her small body, and she understood something that she would carry with her forever. She had saved a life once, not because she expected anything in return, not because it was easy or safe or made sense, but simply because she couldn't walk away from a creature that needed help, and somehow, in ways that science couldn't explain and logic couldn't justify, that kindness had echoed back to her at the moment she needed it most. She walked home slowly, Lily babbling questions that Elena barely heard, and when she reached her cottage she sat down in the chair by the window that looked out toward the sea and she watched the water for a long time, wondering if Milo was out there somewhere, wondering if he would ever come back, knowing that it didn't really matter because what he had already given her was more than enough. That night, as she tucked Lily into bed and kissed her forehead and listened to her daughter's breathing slow into sleep, Elena thought about all the small choices we make every day, the moments when we could look away but don't, the times when compassion costs us something but we offer it anyway, and she realized that we never really know how far those ripples will travel or how long they will last. Sometimes the smallest life remembers the biggest kindness, and sometimes, when you least expect it, the love you gave away finds its way back to you in ways that feel like miracles. Comment protection if you believe kindness always comes back, and share this story with someone who believes animals never forget.